Hey guys, Jake here from 8020 Media, bringing you a video today on Dodge's 3.0 EcoDiesel. This video is going to cover common problems and reliability issues with the 3.0, which there are plenty of. However, before we get into all of the problems and issues with this engine, we're going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background and backstory on it. So this engine was released in 2014, essentially to fill the gap between the 5.7 Hemi gas V8 and the 6.7 Cummins turbo diesel, which is only available in the 3/4 ton and full ton trucks. And so if you wanted a diesel engine, but you also wanted a smaller half-ton truck, there were no options available. Like I prefaced at the intro to this video, there are a lot of problems with this engine. The first one, or maybe not the first problem, but the reason why I think there are a lot of problems is because they didn't let Cummins build it. Cummins has been building the best diesel engines in the industry for 30 plus years now. Rather than having Cummins build the engine, they went with a completely clean slate design with their own Italian in-house brand. I don't know about you, but I don't think Italians are well known for building diesel engines. Anyways, the 6.7 Cummins is also an inline six, which is unique because all of the other big diesels by GM and Ford are V8s. But Dodge has had a lot of success with the inline six design on the 6.7 Cummins, and it still produces just as much power as the bigger V8s out there. Rather than sticking with an inline six design for the 3.0 EcoDiesel, they decided, hey, let's make this a V6 engine. And so we have a completely new engine configuration that Dodge isn't used to using in any of their trucks, built by a completely new company who's never built engines for any of their trucks before. You put those two together and what you get is a really bad engine. Now, I will caveat this by saying there are two generations of the 3.0 EcoDiesel. The first generation lasted from 2014 until 2019, and then in 2020, this engine was so bad that they rebuilt it almost from the ground up. 80 to 85% of the second generation 2020 plus models is completely brand new designs, brand new parts, and so it shares very few similarities with the first generation engine. That was done to hopefully fix a lot of the reliability issues that we've seen with the first generations. However, we will get to whether or not that was an effective fix for all of the problems that this engine has. So I will preface this by saying that the issues that we're first going to cover here are associated with the first generation engines, and so these are all the problems with the 2014 to 2019 engines, and then we will, after this, cover problems with the 2020 engines. Those are obviously a lot newer, and so it's been a little bit more difficult to pinpoint what is a common problem on it, but there have been a number of issues that we've seen pop up on a number of these engines, and so we'll discuss those once we get through the Gen 1 issues here. So the first issue is with the oil cooler. The oil cooler, especially when towing, I would say it's not exclusive to towing, but when towing, the oil cooler fails very easily. And so these trucks have a 12,500 pound towing capacity. If you tow anything more than probably 7,000 pounds, you're extremely prone to having your oil cooler fail. This is also true, or more true, if you live at altitude and tow things at altitude. And now, while it isn't exclusive to towing, it most frequently happens when towing. But what happens when the oil cooler fails is it causes oil to mix with coolant, and this contaminates the whole cooling system and ultimately ends up grenading the engine. And so you need a completely new engine. This is mostly attributed to the 2014 to 2016 models. While the first generation lasted from 2014 to 2019, in 2016 they did come out with a number of design changes that fixed some of these issues that the first years had. And so mostly 2014 to 2016. However, it's not impossible for this to happen for later years. I just wouldn't call it common for anything produced from kind of late 2016 onwards. But this is a serious issue in the sense that it requires a completely new engine. So the second most common problem with the 3.0 EcoDiesel is with the EGR system, and more specifically the EGR cooler. The EGR cooler is prone to cracking. When the EGR cooler cracks, it can spill coolant into the engine bay. And so this was ultimately recalled by Dodge because there were a few instances where the coolant spilling into the engine bay actually caused an engine fire. And so in 2019, they issued a recall for 108,000 trucks to replace the EGR cooler. Now, the one caveat to the EGR cooler failure and issues is that this isn't really a problem for Dodge and the 3.0 EcoDiesel specifically. This is a problem for any diesel engine in today's day and age. The 6.6 Duramax, the 6.7 Power Stroke, and the 6.7 Cummins all have these issues. I think because these systems are still very new to engines in general, to where we haven't quite perfected the design of them yet. And so EGR cooler failure is a common problem on virtually any diesel engine, whether it's a full-size 6.7 or the smaller 3.0 EcoDiesel. With that being said, the only thing that this affects is the EGR system. There's no kind of catastrophic engine failure or major problems that can be caused from it. However, the EGR system and the cooler itself are very expensive, and so it's not a very fun repair bill if you do have a bad EGR cooler that needs to be replaced that isn't under warranty. Third common problem is high pressure fuel pump failure. These engines use the Bosch CP 4.2 fuel pump, and these fuel pumps are known to self-destruct from the inside outwards. And inside of a fuel pump is a number of metal components, such as a metal impeller that actually spins around to push the fluid outwards. When these things implode from the inside, it sends a ton of tiny little metal shards throughout the whole fueling system. And so it sends it through all of the fuel lines, through the fuel injectors, and so on. And so it essentially takes out the whole fuel system with it. If this happens, you're not going to be able to drive your truck for very much longer afterwards. But in the best case scenario, you're going to have to replace everything within the fueling system. So all of the lines, the fuel pumps, the injectors, and you're looking at probably somewhere close to $10,000 to do that if it isn't under warranty. Worst case scenario, some of these metal pieces get injected into the engine and into the combustion chamber, and you end up needing a full new engine or a serious rebuild. In these cases, we've seen some estimates in between the $22,000 and $26,000 range. And so if this happens not under warranty, it's probably a total loss, and move on to a new truck, since it's extremely expensive to get a new engine for them. Fourth most common problem on the list. Fortunately, we finally have one that isn't very expensive and isn't that big of a deal, but it is a leaking exhaust coupler. And so the downpipe, which connects from the turbo to the DPF, has couplers on each end of it that hold them in place. For 2014 to 2015, they just had a defective design with the couplers that caused the couplers to leak. Sometime in 2015, they fixed that. And so from 2015 onwards, or somewhere mid-2015 onwards, there aren't any issues with the couplers leaking. Also, this only affects the two-wheel drive vehicles, so if you have four-wheel drive, it's not an issue. But like I said, least worrisome problem on the list, because all it creates is a small exhaust leak, which isn't that big of a deal and doesn't affect longevity, durability, or drivability. Fifth problem on the list is with the timing chain. The camshaft gears on the exhaust side passenger head are only held on by one bolt. And because there's only one of them is put under extreme stress, that in conjunction with heat cycles of them getting hot and cold, it expands and contracts. What that can cause is the gear to start slipping, and this can cause the piston and the valves to crash into each other. We have seen a few cases where the exhaust valve actually blows completely through the piston, which is pretty impressive. This problem really isn't that common. It has been blown up on the internet, and so it is a problem. I would not consider it a common problem, but it was something I felt we had to address, just since if you look anywhere online, you're going to see this problem mentioned as a common problem. And so it's been blown out of proportion. It is something to be considerate of, but this issue specifically isn't something that I would avoid buying one of these engines solely because of. But it does require a brand new engine or a very serious rebuild if you end up having some time and chain issues. So that concludes it for our problems for the first generations. As you can tell based off of the issues that we listed, the 2014 to 2019 models are not very reliable. They have a lot of problems with them, but the biggest issue is the majority of the problems that they have result in engine failure or $10,000 plus repair bills. And so it's not the longest list of problems that we've ever seen, but all of the problems on it are extremely severe and catastrophic. And so 2014 to 2019 first generation models get a very poor reliability grade. I wouldn't touch one with a 10-foot pole, but that's just me. If you are looking at one of them, I would absolutely avoid 2014 to 2015. If you're going to get a 2016 one, make sure you get a late year build date, since the changes that were made in 2016 were made somewhere in between the middle of the year. And so stick to things built in the second half of the year. Anything from 2017 to 2019 onwards certainly has better reliability, but still not perfect, but a lot better than the 2014 to 2015 models. But overall, I still wouldn't touch any of them from 2014 to 2019. And now, like I mentioned earlier, they went ahead and completely rebuilt this engine virtually from the ground up in 2020 because of all of the issues that it had with it, which is sort of funny in the sense that they're now discontinuing it in 2023 in favor of an electric truck. But nonetheless, it's a completely new engine from 2020 onwards. The 2020 Plus engine is better. It still has some serious problems, and some serious problems that are different than from what the first one has, because it's a new engine that we're talking about. And so the biggest issue with the 2020 Plus models is that it has an oil pressure issue. The oil pressure issue essentially leads to the engine not getting enough oil, and so it goes through, I guess, oil starvation. And what that causes bearing failure, and the bearing failure essentially compounds and grenades your engine, leads to catastrophic or complete engine failure. And so there have been a number of 2020 Plus engines that we have seen experience complete engine failure within the 50,000 mile mark. In addition to that, the EGR cooler is also an issue, but like I mentioned, that's a diesel-wide issue, but still an issue for the second generation engines. And then the fuel system still has problems as well, so there's still issues with the fuel pump and the rest of the fueling system as well. And so while I do say 2020 Plus is better, they also haven't been around long enough for us to really say that it's better. I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but in 2014, 2015, and 2016, the 3.0 EcoDiesel made it on the list of the board's 10 best engines. And so clearly those were the worst years for this engine possible. And so if this engine can win the best engine list while having all of the issues that we just mentioned, it's certainly too early to say whether the 2020 engines are going to be better than these ones, considering some of the issues that we've seen with complete engine failure. Well, that wraps things up on our video on the 3.0 EcoDiesel. Certainly a good engine in theory. There have been a number of these that have made it 300,000 plus miles with zero issues. If you can get that type of mileage out of this engine while getting 30 plus miles per gallon, absolutely fantastic. However, we have just seen too many cases of these things having significant engine problems for us to ever want to touch one of them, but that's not to say that there aren't some good 3.0 EcoDiesels that have been made. The ones that haven't had any problems have been absolutely fantastic engines, extremely reliable, cost efficient, but you're really kind of playing a 50-50 game on whether you get a good one or you get a bad one. Anyways, that's all we've got on common problems and reliability with the 3.0 EcoDiesel. If you liked this video, we'd appreciate it if you gave us a subscribe or a like. And as always, we also wrote an article on this as well on one of our blogs. And so if you want to jump in there to get more details on any of the problems or learn what some of the signs and symptoms of these problems are, check in the description for the link to our article on it, and you can read some additional details. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you guys next time.